The Hollow Crown. Harrison Walsh stood at the edge of the crystal-lined rooftop bar, surveying the glittering Manhattan skyline with the detached interest of someone who owned several of its most iconic buildings. At 45, he had amassed a technology fortune that exceeded $9 billion, with investments spanning 4 continents and a name that opened doors in every financial district worldwide. The annual Walsh Innovations Charity Gala represented the pinnacle of his carefully cultivated public image, humanitarian tech mogul, visionary leader, and family man. 500 of the world's most influential people mingled below him, drinking champagne worth more than what most Americans earned in a week while discussing charitable causes they'd forgotten about by morning. Harrison adjusted his custom Italian suit and checked his watch. 8 minutes until his keynote speech. Perfect timing for another congratulatory message about his recent acquisition of Neurotech, a rising medical software company that would add another billion to his portfolio. "There you are," came a warm voice behind him. Jasmine Reed Walsh, his wife of 11 years, approached with purposeful grace. At 41, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had once been at the top of her field. Before their marriage, Jasmine had been one of the country's most innovative architects, designing sustainable structures that graced architectural magazines and won international awards. "Harrison, I'd like you to meet Dr. Franklin Reyes," she said, gesturing to an earnest-looking man beside her. "He's pioneering affordable, sustainable housing technologies that would align perfectly with the new Walsh Foundation initiative." Harrison barely glanced at the man, his attention caught by a notification on his phone. "Not now, Jasmine," he said dismissively. "This is hardly the time for your pet projects." A flash of hurt crossed her face, but she persisted. "Actually, this is exactly the right time. The sustainable housing market is projected to reach $30 billion by next year. We could make a significant impact while—" "I said not now," Harrison interrupted, his voice sharp enough to draw attention from nearby guests. He finally looked directly at her, irritation evident in his eyes. "My wife seems to forget she hasn't practiced architecture in years. She's simply not qualified to speak on these matters anymore." The surrounding conversations hushed as guests turned to watch the uncomfortable scene unfold. Jasmine stood perfectly still, her expression frozen as the final thread of her professional dignity snapped under the weight of his public dismissal. "Harrison, that's completely inappropriate," she said quietly. He set down his whiskey glass with deliberate force. "You gave up your career to support mine and raise our children. That was your choice. Stop trying to insert yourself into professional conversations that don't concern you." 7 years of suppressed resentment crystallized in that moment. 7 years of raising their twin boys, William and James, while Harrison traveled the world. 7 years of arranging his perfect home, attending his perfect events, and maintaining his perfect image, while her own dreams gathered dust. Jasmine stepped closer to him, her voice barely audible. "You're right, Harrison. I should leave the business discussions to you." She turned to address the watching crowd, her voice clear and steady. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the interruption. My husband clearly believes that 11 years of marriage and 2 children don't qualify me to have opinions on his business decisions." Harrison's face darkened with fury. "Security!" he called sharply. "Please escort my wife out before she embarrasses herself further." With perfect composure, Jasmine removed her wedding ring and placed it on the nearest table with a soft clink that seemed to echo through the suddenly silent room. "I can see myself out," she said, her voice reaching every corner of the space. She walked through the parting crowd with her head held high. At the door, she turned once to look at Harrison, who stood frozen by the bar, his face flushed with anger. "Goodbye, Harrison," she said, her words carrying a devastating finality. "I hope your empire keeps you warm at night." 3 days later, Harrison Walsh woke in his penthouse with a pounding headache and the slow, nauseating realization that he might have made the greatest mistake of his life. He hadn't seen William and James since before the gala. They were supposedly staying with Jasmine's sister. By afternoon, his calls to friends, family members, and former colleagues confirmed a disturbing pattern. No one had seen them. No one knew where they had gone. And most troublingly, no one seemed surprised by their disappearance. It was what he found in his office that stopped him cold. On his desk, beneath his crystal paperweight, lay a brown envelope that hadn't been there when he left for the gala. The contents inside would shatter the foundations of his carefully constructed world. The hidden leverage. Harrison's hands trembled as he opened the brown envelope. Inside were documents that made his blood run cold. The first item was a series of professional quality photographs, each meticulously time-stamped. They showed him leaving various upscale hotels over the past 8 months, always accompanied by the same woman, Victoria Chambers, the financial director at Walsh Innovations. At 32, she was ambitious, brilliant with numbers, and undeniably beautiful. The photos documented a relationship that had evolved from professional to intimate, capturing stolen moments that Harrison had believed were perfectly discreet. But the affair documentation was merely the opening act of a far more devastating revelation. Behind the photographs lay financial records, bank statements, wire transfer receipts, and offshore account information. SEC filing documents showed money systematically being moved from Walsh Innovations accounts to shell corporations and foreign properties. The total amounted to over $87 million, enough to cripple Walsh Innovations if the theft went public and sufficient to trigger federal investigations that would destroy everything he had built. Harrison felt the floor shift beneath him as he realized the horrifying truth. He had never authorized any of these transfers. His personal access codes and digital signature had been used to move millions out of the company coffers into untraceable offshore holdings. Someone had been systematically stealing from his own company using his credentials. The documents painted a damning picture. Victoria Chambers had been stealing from him while simultaneously conducting an affair with him, and he had been too absorbed in his own ego and sense of invincibility to notice either betrayal. At the end of the financial documentation was a handwritten note in Jasmine's elegant script. The FBI will receive copies of these documents in exactly 72 hours unless certain conditions are met. I suggest you use that time to think carefully about what kind of father you want to be for William and James. The choice is yours. Below the note was an untraceable phone number and a simple instruction. Call this number at midnight tonight if you want to save everything that truly matters. Harrison collapsed into his leather chair, the full weight of his situation crushing down upon him. His wife had proof of his affair. She had documentation of embezzlement that could land him in federal prison for decades. And most terrifying of all, she had been collecting this evidence while he was living his life, utterly oblivious to her investigation. The woman he had dismissed as merely a supportive wife and mother had been running a counterintelligence operation. That would have impressed veteran FBI agents. Jasmine Reed Walsh had completely outmaneuvered him. Exactly at midnight, Harrison's phone rang. Hello? His voice sounded foreign to his own ears. Hello, Harrison. I assume you've had time to review the materials I left for you. Jasmine's voice was calm, clinical, completely in control. Jasmine, where are you? Where are my sons? They are safe. They are somewhere you cannot use your money or influence to force them back into a toxic environment. These documents, this evidence of financial fraud, I had nothing to do with any of that, he said desperately. I know, she replied, the certainty in her voice stunning him. But that won't matter to federal investigators, will it? By the time you prove your innocence, if you ever can, Walsh Innovations will be destroyed. Your reputation will be gone. Then why show them to me? What do you want? I want you to understand what it feels like to lose everything that matters, she replied, her voice carrying a weight that made his chest tighten. Our sons have everything they could ever want materially, Harrison. What they don't have is A father who knows their favorite books, or who remembers to attend their school performances without his assistant sending calendar reminders. They don't have a father who has ever asked them about their dreams. He felt something shatter inside his chest. When was the last time he had truly listened to William talk about his science experiments or watched James play soccer? You're not even being called out for the affair, Jasmine said firmly. I'm calling you out because you missed William's piano recital last month to have dinner with Victoria. I'm calling you out because your sons have learned to stop asking for your attention because they know they will always come second to your next acquisition. Victoria saw an opportunity in your arrogance and took it, Jasmine continued with devastating clarity. She's been stealing from you while conducting an affair with you, and you were too busy feeding your ego to notice either betrayal. But the money isn't what matters here. Then what do you want? Harrison asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I want you to make a decision. You can do what you always do. Throw money at this problem. Hire the best investigators to track us down. Use your wealth and connections to force us back. Fight me the way you fight every other obstacle in your path. She paused, letting the weight of the alternative settle between them. Or you can finally start listening to what I've been trying to tell you for years. You can stop treating your family like business assets to be managed and start treating us like human beings who deserve your actual presence, not just your financial support. The decision is yours, Harrison, she finished. But choose carefully, because some battles, once you start them, can never be undone. The call ended, leaving him alone in his vast penthouse with the most important decision of his life. Harrison Walsh had built his empire by refusing to surrender to anyone or anything. Compromise was for the weak, and he had never been weak. Less than 6 hours after their midnight call, he made his decision. Find them, he instructed his assembled team of specialists. 3 private investigators, 2 cybersecurity experts, and a former intelligence agent. Money was no object. Legal boundaries were suggestions to be overcome. His wife had given him a choice between fighting and listening, and Harrison Walsh chose war. 48 hours, promised Eleanor Vance, his lead investigator. Your wife is clever, but she's not a professional. Harrison was about to learn how catastrophically wrong that assumption was. 24 hours into the search, Vance spread documents across his conference table, her expression grim. Mr. Walsh, your wife didn't just plan her disappearance. She's been executing a comprehensive strategy for months. The evidence was devastating. Jasmine had liquidated personal investments starting nearly a year ago, secured new identities through legal channels, and thoroughly researched international custody laws. She had used military-grade security protocols, encrypted communications, and counter-surveillance techniques that professional intelligence officers would admire. She anticipated you would hire investigators, Vance added with reluctant respect. She expected this exact response and prepared for it. The woman Harrison had dismissed as a simple homemaker had been running a sophisticated operation against him for months. Every resource he could deploy, she had already neutralized. So what you're telling me, Harrison said slowly, is that my wife outmaneuvered a team of professional investigators before you were even hired? Vance nodded gravely. The brilliant architect you married never stopped being brilliant, sir. She just redirected her expertise toward protecting her sons from a father she believed had become a threat to their emotional well-being. 3 days. Later, a package arrived at his office. Inside was a USB drive labeled in Jasmine's precise handwriting, "For Harrison, since you made your choice." The video began with Jasmine sitting in a simple room. "Since you chose to fight us instead of listen," she began firmly, "I need to be more direct about what's truly at stake." She showed him a box filled with crumpled drawings, cards, and handmade gifts. "These are things William and James made for you over the last 2 years. Birthday cards Father's Day presents, drawings of family vacations we never took." She held up a crude drawing of stick figures labeled Daddy, Mommy, Will, James in front of his building. "William made this for your birthday last year. You looked at it for 15 seconds before taking a call from Tokyo. The box was filled with discarded expressions of love, art thrown away, because the boys learned that giving them to him meant seeing their work briefly acknowledged before being cast aside. Last month, Jasmine continued, James asked me why you don't love them enough to listen to their stories. Her voice finally cracked. What do you think I should have told him? Harrison felt something vital collapsing inside him. Through the camera lens, his wife's eyes held not hatred, but profound disappointment. This was never about punishing you, Harrison. It was about showing you what you're losing before it's too late. The video ended with a single line of text. When you're ready to truly listen, call this number. For the first time in decades, Harrison Walsh faced an opponent he couldn't defeat with money or power. The empire he'd built suddenly felt hollow and meaningless compared to what he'd carelessly discarded. In his empty penthouse overlooking a city that no longer impressed him, Harrison made the hardest call of his life. Hello? Jasmine's voice answered. I'm ready to listen, he said, his voice breaking. Please, tell me how to fix this. That, she replied softly, is the first right question you've asked in years.